We are doing a Hoya care video today. Many of you have asked for a Hoya care video, so I am going to show you guys how I care for my Hoya plants, and I will show you and teach you some other tips and tricks that I learned to better care for mine. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Melissa and I'm really happy you're here. I am really excited to talk about my Hoyas and how I care for them, so let's get started. This Hoya in this pot reminds me of an elephant trunk. Do you see this thing? I keep putting it up to my face and imagining an elephant trunk. I don't know, I'm so silly. Before I get started, I will link my Hoya video up here. I did a Hoya collection video. It's been a couple months, I think, and I have purchased I think I've only got 4 new Hoyas. They were all from the big box store. I have not repotted any of those yet, so eventually here I'm going to repot them. So first things first, we are going to talk about light. Light is the most important thing, I feel like, when caring for a Hoya besides water. Any plant needs light to grow, and Hoyas really do appreciate bright light. A lot of my Hoyas actually get direct sun. They are in my south window. They're either a foot back right in the window or they're hanging from the window. They like to see the sun from the window. So if you can give your Hoyas really bright light, they are going to love you for it. I have some smaller ones in some different areas of my home, and I actually have a big one in different light, and I have a couple in the cabinet behind me. So there are some of my collection that do just get only grow lights, and they do great with that, but I just prefer natural light. So if you have great natural light, a south window, a west window preferably, and I do have a Hoya in an east window, and that morning sun is actually great for Hoyas, so east window would be perfect. North window isn't that great of light just for any plant, so I would avoid a north facing window, and I would just supplement with a grow light if that's all you have. Watering is very important too, and I feel like that's where a lot of people make the mistake with their Hoyas, is they overwater them, and I can go weeks, you guys, without watering my Hoyas. During winter, sometimes I can go 5 to 6 weeks in between watering, and they really can do just fine in between. There's many factors that go into how fast a plant dries. It's going to be different for every home and every environment, but the key is to water when the soil has completely dried. So if you think about Hoyas and how they are in their natural habitat, they aren't really packed in tight, dense soil, so they honestly need a really chunky, breathable mix. I use my normal chunky mix for my Hoyas, but lots of perlite, lots of bark, really breathable soil. They are going to love that. Even though Hoyas have a delicate root system, I go off watering based 1 off the soil and then 2 off their leaves. Their leaves will be the biggest factor on when your Hoya plant is thirsty. There are like thinner leaf Hoyas that their leaves are much thinner and they do require more water. And then there are also Hoyas that have really thick leaves, almost like a succulent, and they store water a lot longer. So even when the soil is dry, if their leaves don't feel soft and wrinkly, then I will hold on watering until they start to show me signs that they're thirsty. I will show you some examples of what I mean by thinner leafed Hoya and thicker leafed Hoya. So for example, this is my Hoya obovata. I originally got this as a cutting. If you think about their leaves, how thick they are, they can store water a lot longer. So this one is actually thirsty, and I picked this one because it is thirsty, so I wanted to show you specifically. I'm going to hold this up, and if you can see when I squeeze, this is called the taco test. Do you see those wrinkles that are showing up? And on the back side, if you squeeze, you can see those wrinkles. So this leaf bends really easily. I will say new growth is always going to be softer and bend more easily. Don't go off the new leaves. You have to go by the older leaves on the plant. So this is a new leaf, but this has been a new leaf for a while. You can even see some of these thicker leaves. You see how wrinkly they are. So this plant is definitely thirsty, this Hoya, and it's actually, I need to repot this plant because it only has 1 drain hole, and I just want this Hoya to be repotted in a more breathable plastic nursery pot. I just put him in here because I thought it was really cute, and you know, it does look like an elephant trunk. Even though this soil has been dry for a while, I will not water until the leaves are wrinkly like this. So when the leaves start to get wrinkly on a majority of the bottom leaves, that's when I will water. This is another Hoya with an example of some thicker leaves. It's a Hoya Crimson Queen because the queen wears the crown, so the variegation is on the outside of the leaf versus the princess where it's on the inside. So when I go to squeeze these leaves, they still feel kind of, you don't want to squeeze so hard because sometimes, see, I just cracked this leaf. Sometimes if you do the taco test and you squeeze too hard and they're not easily bendable, you can snap them and crack them and break them. So just be careful and mindful when you do the taco test. I usually don't squeeze up anymore. I usually can just like feel them. I can just bend a few and I can tell this plant isn't thirsty. Even though the soil has been dry for a while, majority of these bottom leaves still feel like thick and they don't feel soft. And so I'm probably gonna wait another several days and recheck. I usually go around my plant room and just like feel, I can instantly feel when they're thirsty. So I will wait on this one and not water this plant yet. And then some examples of a thinner leaf Hoya. I'm gonna show you my Hoya polynura. And so this Hoya here, their leaves are like papery thin. Do you see how papery thin these leaves are? You can't really do the taco test on this Hoya. They're just too thin and it's hard to tell based on the leaves when this plant is thirsty. So for Hoyas like this, as soon as the soil is dry, I will water this plant. And so this plant is actually thirsty because the soil is dry. I can go off the weight of the pot too and it doesn't feel heavy, and the bottom of the pot looks completely dry. So I will be giving this Hoya some water just because thinner leaved Hoyas don't hold on to water for very long, and as soon as that moisture is gone out of the soil, you don't want the delicate roots to dry up because Hoyas do have a delicate root system. So for thinner leaved Hoyas, I will water as soon as the soil is dry, and I will just go around my plant room, pick it up real quick, feel it, and if it feels light and looks dry, I will give it water. So this is definitely one I'm more cautious on watering and watering a little bit more frequently. I'm going to show you another example of a Hoya that has a thinner leaf. This is my Hoya australis lisa. And this growth has been beautiful since I last did my collection video. These new leaves have gotten so big compared to some of these smaller leaves. And I think it's because I put some slow release fertilizer in here. So this Hoya is growing a lot better. Now, a lot of these bigger leaves are very thin feeling and some of the bottom ones are a bit thicker, but this is technically a thinner leaved Hoya. So again, same thing, when the soil has completely dried, I will water this plant. You can test by sticking your finger in the soil too. But most of my Hoyas, I can just feel by weight. You just get accustomed and used to your plant and you know when the soil is dry versus when it's not. So this is a Hoya that I would give more water to just because the leaves are thinner and they don't store it as long. So we briefly talked about soil and I just want to preference again, Hoyas really do prefer a chunky mix that's very aerated. And I'm gonna show you here how chunky this soil is and what they prefer. So if you use potting soil, definitely add those amendments in because they are really going to appreciate a very breathable mix. And when you're potting a Hoya, make sure not to go too large because Hoyas do love to be root bound. They love to be snug in their pot. So if you are potting up a cutting that has just a tiny bit of roots, make sure you start kind of small. I honestly avoid using 2-inch pots. I think they're really hard to water just because there isn't a lot of water that can be contained in that soil and they just dry out really fast and you can easily forget about them and you can miss a watering, and really that can be detrimental sometimes to plants when they're started in such a small pot. So this I think is probably like a 3-inch pot. This is perfect for starting a Hoya in, and they are going to take a long time to acclimate in the pot if they're cuttings. I have several Hoyas in my collection that were started from just cuttings, and they have taken 8-9+ months to adjust in their pot until they finally start to push new growth. So just be patient if you have a Hoya that's a cutting and it has roots and you've potted it up and you don't have any new growth. Just give it lots of time. Just be really patient with it. It will grow, especially if you're giving it great light. Just try and be patient because they do take a while to establish and push that new growth. Kind of based on light, we will talk about the environment for Hoyas, like humidity, dry air versus moisture in the air. Now, Hoyas do love humidity. Now, do they need it? I definitely say no. In my old house, my Hoya Hoyas were used to 30% humidity all the time. I did not run a humidifier by them. They had no extra and they did just fine. I do keep a couple Hoyas in my IKEA cabinet and it is more humid in there. It's not weather stripped. My humidity is usually in the 70s. My Hoyas in there, I have 2 Hoyas in there and I'm going to show you one. They love it. I honestly think they love the grow lights in there too because it's a really great grow light system I have in my cabinet. Like all of my anthuriums and everything are just thriving in my cabinet. So this Hoya Chelsea was a cutting. It was the original 2 leaves here. These 2 here. And so when I moved, it had not pushed any new growth yet. And this here has been all new growth since I moved. Do you see this whole vine has pushed out since being in my IKEA cabinet? It just loves it in there. It loves the overall environment, the conditions it's in. So Hoyas do love that environment, but it's not needed to have high humidity for Hoyas to grow. So I just wanted to throw that out there if you're someone worried about humidity and always thought Hoyas need high humidity. In my experience, they just don't need really high humidity. Next, we will talk about fertilizer, and you can fertilize Hoyas with any fertilizer that you would normally use. Hoyas in general, just like any plant, just need to be fertilized because soil nutrients will get depleted. I'm slowly transitioning to slow release fertilizer. I also will use the orchid mist on my Hoyas. It looks like this. It's by Miracle Grow. This is pretty inexpensive. I think it's like $5 a bottle. This is a type of fertilizer that you spray. And so I will take this and just spray my Hoyas with it on the leaves. And I just let it soak in and it absorbs through the leaves. And this I use on top of the slow release fertilizer. I don't know for a fact, but from what I have heard rumors about, and some people are just saying that they're convinced that this will help their Hoyas bloom. I don't know how true that is, but it has not harmed my plants using this in addition to my other fertilizer. So if I can try to promote blooms is kind of my thought process, and I'm definitely going to continue to use this because I feel like if it's going to help them, why not try it, and it doesn't hurt them. So I will use this in addition to my other fertilizer. Let's talk about Hoya blooms. I do get asked that question sometimes, and I've had a few of my Hoyas bloom for me. Blooming on Hoyas will come with age of the plant and the condition of the plant. Now it's a very young Hoya. It was started from a cutting. You haven't had the Hoya in your care very long. It will take a while to get those blooms on your Hoya because they need to situate and establish in the pot and have time to grow. Now, some people will just buy a more mature Hoya that has blooms, and that's how they get blooms. Just be patient. There's no like secret to get blooms. It's just going to take time, unfortunately. I currently don't have any with blooms right now. I think my other Hoya, I'll have to take a look because I have one that is always blooming. It's been blooming for a year and a half. I actually see a couple peduncles. My Hoya Sunrise just bloomed. I will put some photos here of what it looked like, and I've had a Hoya Pupicalix bloom, and so I've had 3 bloom for me actually, and I have some more with peduncles. It's more exciting to me when the plant's been in your care and it blooms because then you've like grown that plant to make it bloom versus when you buy a Hoya with a bloom, it's completely a different feeling. Yeah, it's definitely more special when you've grown it for a while and then it blooms. I also want to touch on how Hoyas grow. Now, I do get asked sometimes, what is this long thing growing from my Hoya? What is this stick here, this little thing? So this is actually how Hoyas grow. Hoyas in nature love to climb. They will throw these little tendrils out. Some can get really, really, really long. I don't know if the camera's picking this one up that well. So they throw these out because they are looking for something to climb onto. And once they have something to climb, they will start pushing out new leaves and new growth. So whenever you see this, do not cut these off because they will grow new leaves, and I'm going to show you an example. I have 2 little leaves coming. So this is a Hoya australis. It's just the regular green, and this vine, you can see 2 leaves have pushed out here, and so this vine is growing. And then here you can see 2 little baby leaves starting, and this is the node right here, and then there's a ton of space, and then up here you can see 2 more tiny leaves. and then another long space. And here's a bump, this part here. You don't see the leaves yet, it's just the node. So it will push out 2 new leaves from there as well. And then the tip here, it'll continue to vine and push out new leaves. If your Hoyas have this, you can let them grow crazy or however you want. What I like to do is provide some type of trellis. So this is just a little heart-shaped trellis, and I will take this tendril and just fold it around the trellis just to give it some support. And you can use little orchid clips, you can use any kind of cute clips that you want, and they will love to have that support. It's really up to you and the look and what you prefer. And here's another example with this abovada. So you can see the new leaves forming here. It's going to do this one, and then it has another little one here on this side that'll grow. And then here's the new ones. You can see two little leaves there getting ready to grow. I also want to talk about propagating your Hoya. So if you look at this one's a good example. So this Hoya abovada again. So you see on the stem, do you see all those white bumps? That is where roots are going to grow. So these are your nodes right here where the new growth is, the little like main bump. So that's a node. And then this here is a node. And so all on the stem, you'll see these white little bumps. And so that's where new roots will grow. So if I wanted to propagate this Hoya here, I would, since this doesn't have any leaves yet, I wouldn't cut like where my thumb is. I wouldn't cut here just because this will be just like a little wet stick, and that may have a harder time pushing new growth. And sometimes when you cut below leaves that haven't fully developed, sometimes the new growth won't grow. Even though this one has 2 leaves, they're not fully developed. So in order to propagate this, I honestly would cut below this one. So I would cut on the stem right here. And so that way you have 1 mature leaf, and then these ones will continue to develop. And then once you have more leaves, you can cut in between. That's just what I personally would do. It's really up to you. And I will show you this example as well. This one here doesn't have a long tendril. It might be easier to show you how to propagate. So it has a new growth here and it has 2 leaves. So I would honestly probably cut below on the stem, like right here. And then all those little white bumps, that's where roots will grow from. So if you stick this in water, moss, perlite, whichever you prefer, they will root and grow in multiple areas on the stem. Or since this leaf here isn't fully developed, I would probably cut below that one, like where this one big leaf is, I would probably cut here. And that way you'll have this new growth. And then I only have 1 Hoya propagating right now. It is in water. I actually just propped it from that propagation video. So let me show you the Hoya that I have in water. So this here is my Hoya linearis. I recently propped it and it's in water. I don't know if you can see the roots on that forming. So what I did to prop my linearis, so this is going to grow roots from the little nodes. So you can see this one has rooted in multiple areas out of the nodes. And if this one had little white bumps, it would throw more roots out of those little white dots. But each of these little nodes is forming roots. So this I could have cut like in between each one, but I wanted longer sections. So once this node here starts to push out roots, then I will pot this one back in the pot. Hoyas root very, very easily. They do have a thin root system, so keep that in mind. I would let your Hoya roots get just a few inches long at least before you put into soil, and then make sure not to use too large of a pot. I can either pot these up in a separate pot, or I can add these back into the main pot, which is what I'm going to do to fill mine out. So I think that's all I wanted to talk about with Hoya care, and then I'm going to show you some other Hoyas I have around my room here, and whether or not I think they're a thinner leaf Hoya or a thicker leaf Hoya, and how often I would water it. So this window here faces south, and most of my Hoyas are on this window, and it's getting ready to storm again here, but normally there would be sunlight coming in, and a lot of these Hoyas do get sun on their leaves. Look at that pink leaf coming in on this one. The new growth will come in later sometimes. There's some that are actually in the window. Like this Hoya Sunrise recently bloomed for me. It had all these peduncles that have fallen off. And don't cut your peduncles too. Once the flower blooms fall off, because they will rebloom, because this Propagating has bloomed twice for me. You can see the 2 spots that had blooms. So leave these on, they will rebloom from the same peduncles. Don't cut those. So this Hoya Sunrise is a very thirsty Hoya. It does have some thinner leaves, but I can usually squeeze a few, and like right now I can tell it's not thirsty. So I'll usually just go around and just like squeeze a few. but make sure you're squeezing the older growth because the newer growth will always be more thin. And so this one isn't thirsty, it's still pretty thick. This Shepherdii does get wrinkly. This one has grown so much since I've had it. I can like feel a few of these bottom ones and I can tell like they get kind of soft and wrinkly a bit. So this one I can tell isn't thirsty. And here's my Linearis since I cut it. This one here is a thinner leafed one, my Retusa, and I would definitely water this one more often. So like my Linearis, my Polynura, and then several of these ones that I got from the big box store recently. This is a Hoyetii, and I have a Snow Caps that I got. I have a Hoya Compacta here that I got from the big box store. And I also have that Bilobata that I got from the big box store. So all those are new and I have not repotted them yet. They're still in this Costa Farms pot, so I'm eventually going to repot them. This Burtonnaise has been blooming for maybe like, oh, I don't know, since April of last year. It has another peduncle here, but this one is always blooming for me. Oh, there's another one. You can see the bloom on that one. But yeah, this thing had like 4 blooms recently that all fell off because they fall and they make a mess in my plant room. And then I have a lot of Hoyas on this plant shelf here. They're just like in various spots. I have a variegated compacta that is over here. This one is growing. This is like a new leaf. This is my macrophylla. And so I repotted this recently and put it on a trellis. This one, it gets very wrinkly when it's thirsty. I usually go off this main, this is the original leaf, and usually it gets wrinkly and soft when it's thirsty, so I know that this one doesn't want water yet. I also want to show you my Hoya Crimson Princess over here. So this is my only Hoya that gets east window light here, and you can see all this new growth that is vining and pushing out. This one I have trailing, I don't have it staked, but do you see all that new growth? So this one gets morning sun and it loves it. This is my oldest Hoya in my collection. It has not bloomed for me. I've had this Hoya, oh, I don't know, going on over 2 years now. So this is year 3. And so I'm hoping it blooms for me this year. I don't know, I would really love to have peduncles on this one. So I'm just patiently waiting. This one, it gets very wrinkly when it's thirsty, and I haven't actually watered this one in a while, and I can tell, yeah, I can tell this one probably wants some water. And I'll occasionally get like yellowing leaves. Usually yellowing leaves, the older leaves on the plant will die, or it can be from like too much or too little water. But if I have like an occasional yellow leaf, it's not that big of a deal. As long as your plant seems happy and growing and it's healthy, then I wouldn't worry about it too much. But yeah, I love this Hoya. So that really is it with my Hoya care. I honestly find them just to be easy care plants, and it's nice to have plants that you can kind of forget about and just leave for a while without worrying about them, because I know I could leave for 2 weeks plus and come back and my Hoyas will be completely fine. And my plant room is really warm and hot sometimes, and so I know like they'll be fine. So just based off my experience, I just think they're just really easy care. They don't give me any trouble. I just know in my head, I've always like learned from the very beginning that do not overwater your Hoyas. So ever since then, it's been drilled into my brain to wait to water. If you're not sure that it's thirsty, hold off a few more days, because it's not going to hurt the plant, especially if it's a Hoya, if you wait a few more days. It's just nice to have plants in your collection that are less finicky than others, because if I had a lot of finicky plants, then I would be doing so much watering all the time. So it's nice to have Hoyas because they're just easy, they bloom and flower, and they can go a while without water. Really hope this video was helpful for you guys, and hopefully you learned something and can maybe take some of these steps into your care routine and can hopefully get your Hoyas growing a bit better. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this video, and thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you all again very soon.